I'm
A
sorry.
member of the public may address City Council regarding an item on this agenda. Comments must be relevant to the agenda item. This is not intended to be a question and answer session. Prior to speaking, each speaker must fill out the speaker request form and submit it to the city secretary. The speaker request form must be submitted before the meeting is called to order, and each speaker is limited to 4 minutes. There are no citizen speakers signed up.
All right, we will proceed to whoever's crystal ball we're going to be looking at this morning. So who's up first?
Well, Mayor and Council, I'll just provide a brief introduction. As you recall, this is your second budget workshop of the summer. This one will be primarily have the conversation focused around water and the water fund, although we will go through some of the additional funds that you have that are separate from the general fund discussion. There's an influence there certainly across those funds, but this one will be predominantly water fund, your capital projects and community investment plan funds, as well as we talked about asset replacement last time, so we won't go into great detail unless you have any questions on any of those pieces that you want us to speak to. But then you have a number of other smaller funds, hotel occupancy tax, library memorial, et cetera, et cetera. And so we'll just briefly go through those based off y'all's time and schedule this morning. But the biggest thing we want to talk through obviously is the water fund, which is your second largest fund across your city operations. So with that, I'll hand it over to Julie and Trina. They've been doing just a tremendous amount of work in a short period of time, and this one probably more than anything, as unfortunately, although we have a lot of fixed costs, our revenues are very much weather dependent, as you've seen, and sometimes that's not even predictable, because in dry years like we're having this year, when fortunately our citizens are conserving, they're not really requesting water, and so we're not necessarily having the water sales that you would think we would have in a drought year. So a drought year doesn't always mean a banner year for us necessarily in regards to revenues, and we'll talk about that more. So perhaps more even than sales tax, this one really does have a bit of a crystal ball, and sometimes it can be a bit murky. So with that, I'll hand it over to Julie.
Okay, I have my water and my mints, so if y'all get tired of hearing me talk, I'll pass it on to somebody else, because this is it's a pretty big topic. So just a reminder on the calendar first, I can't see behind me, so Jacob is my slide man, so if something goes haywire, we'll back it up. So just to remind you, on the first page here, page 2, just of our calendar, so you know what's coming up. We are expecting to have something from Kirkad by the 25th, no later than that, hopefully before that. Whether it is fully certified or estimated, I don't know at this point. She hasn't given me an indication. I know that on the 13th they had a large number of some of the higher dollar protests, but we haven't seen the outcomes of those yet. So we're not sure what the impact of that's going to be. My plan is to have the budget filed by the 29th, so hopefully we will get that from her on the 25th. That gives us, 72 hours or so to make whatever adjustments we need and finish the book. So that's my plan, is to have it done by then. I believe we could have until Monday because the 31st is on a Sunday, but I don't want to do that if possible. And then just outlines the rest of the year as it pertains to budget. So we'll continue to update you on that stuff as we go along. Okay, so we'll jump right into Water Fund. Just a quick overview. It is the second largest fund. As EA said, it is a very difficult one to budget because there's so many unknowns. As Kim and I were talking about it a minute ago, back in September, you'll remember we did a multi-year rate plan resolution. We're going to have to talk about making changes to that, just given where we were in September of 21 is not where we are now. We couldn't even close to anticipate what the things that we've encountered. So there are some proposed changes to utility rates in here, which we'll talk through. Our largest operating expense, just like most other funds, is personnel. But this fund does have a large maintenance and supply expense just due to chemicals and water system maintenance. Water production is the largest division for obvious reasons. They have the most important job, I guess, overall of making sure we have what we need, so that way we can move on with the rest of the process. So right now, with the rates that we're proposing to you, the budget is balanced. So we'll move through that and get your feedback on how that looks and why. 5.3% increase over fiscal year 22 on both revenue and expenses. That's from the original budget. So we'll talk about the impacts to the amended budget that we did mid-year and how that affects this overall too. So the reason we were able to keep this to 5.3 with the inflation that we're seeing is we really, from a staff all the way up, did very deep dive line item to line item look at every single department. So what I'll tell you is there's no fluff in here. So it's tight. And I think the idea was we're hoping that if the economy starts to kind of come back, that maybe we'll have a little wiggle room as mid-year comes along. But we were just really trying to keep the impact to the customer as minimal as possible, but still be able to cover operations. So a lot of work went into getting us there. A couple things that we did compared to 22, reduced the asset replacement transfer, which is not what I wanted to do. But when you start looking at having to increase rates, again, we're just hoping that maybe we can, be able to make some changes to that mid-year. And just so you know, and NEA spoke to, so Trina has spent the last, 2 months digging into consumption by category, consumption by tier. How does that look compared to the last 3 years? What's the average? How does rainfall impact that? And so a lot of things went into kind of establishing these rates, and she can speak to that a little bit more.
I think it's important, just real quickly, to back up. Not only is this the second largest fund, but this is an enterprise fund. And so that means this fund really operates as a business. When we're supplying a product to folks, and that product needs to be appropriately priced in the market and appropriately priced for the long term.
Well, in saying that too, compared to the general fund, there's not a gap that we can fill with. So, we have a couple of outlets with the general fund that we can, add a little bit of money here or there. We don't have that here because it is like a business. So if we're in the hole, we're in the hole just like a regular business operates. So, wanted to give you just a little bit of update on inflation. I'm sure you guys are all following along with what's going on in the news. So in June, we rose to 9.1. You can see how that looks like over the past year. That inflation is primarily based on cost of goods, even though, fuel does have an impact. But mostly in the water fund, we're dealing with everything that's petroleum based. So you're different, just completely different pricing scheme as you're going to see to milk, bread, and eggs. So with that, if you look at the second chart, I thought this was really interesting. This chart basically is retail gas prices, and the squiggly line there is crude oil price. So you can see kind of as oil prices change, what happens to retail price of gas. I was able to narrow this down to get San Antonio as the red line, and then the U.S. average is the blue line, and Dallas is the green line. So you can pull this from any state, any city that you want to do a comparison. We actually plugged LA in here, and it was way up here out the top of the chart, and we just did that just to see kind of what the comparisons were. But we stuck to Texas. You can see the black line there separates the 2 fiscal years. So starting out in 22, there back in October, you can see we were down there, $2.75 or so retail for fuel. So just thought this was pretty interesting. Gas has increased 70% in the last 12 months and 125% over 18 months. So that's kind of the news story we keep telling. Water fund supplies, as we said, primarily petroleum-based stuff. So, pipe, everything in the ground has gone up if anybody's tried to buy any of that. Our increases that we've seen on chemicals, pipes, meters, it's varied so much that I can't say we're seeing a X% increase. It's gone between 15% on some items and as much to 40% on others. So it's really hard to say, this one's going to stay, and it's not staying constant. It's moving around a lot, again, based on what fuel's doing. So staff, for this year, we've been ramping up some inventory purchases because we've been having a lot of supply chain shortages on simple things like just infrastructure repair type things. So we're trying to buy more when it's available and hopefully get ahead of some of the cost increases. But the biggest thing is to have it available when we need to go out and repair some things. So on the financials this year, you're going to see a little bit of an increase in asset line on inventory dollars just because that's been necessary for us. When we can get it, we need to get it.
Almost everything we do in the water fund, unfortunately, is petroleum based. Every piece of pipe we put in the ground, every chemical we buy, it is all very heavily driven by crude oil prices. And you could see that dark line on this graph is that separation of fiscal years and just the drastic change we've seen since October.
Are you guys looking at buying pipe for the new sewer under the safety building ahead of time, possibly?
Everything we can.
Yeah.
We're trying to assess those products and get them where we can. And there is a little bit of stockpiling when we have the opportunity to. The issue has been it's been very depending on product. There's no rhyme or reason to why the supply chain issues for certain products are not coming through. It's not across the board. It's just kind of all over the place. But yes, we have had to stockpile products if for no other reason, so we have them for emergencies.
Well, for example, we're still working through the AMI project and meter box lids, just the lids, 9 to 10 month wait to get lids. So, yeah, we're having to do a lot of pre-ordering for things, so that we can get them in to be able to do work. And so it puts us behind on things that we need to be doing, just because we can't get what we need. So I mixed this just a little bit. I wanna talk through expenses first. I'm moving on to the next slide there. And just really talk through some notable changes, and then I'll show this to you by category so you can see it, as it lines up. But just to give you some examples, so for what I'm talking to you now, I'm talking to you about current budget. So we amended the budget for COLA and the market adjustments, you'll remember. But then also departments have the ability to go in and make line item transfers from, as long as they don't impact the bottom line, we can move money from one item to the other. So gas, for example, if they're moving money from somewhere, maybe they have a little bit of money to help cover their gas costs and those kind of things. So that's why I really wanted to use current, because I think given the state we're in right now, that's more applicable than going all the way back and saying, well, you know, when we started the year in October, but we've made so many just adjustments along the way. So I can kind of give you both scenarios, but just wanted you to have an idea of, based on the operating budget we're using today, this is what the increase is or decrease.
So when we did the market rate adjustments and the COLA adjustments, I guess more market rate for this fund, but we only amend the general fund, or we do the water fund as well?
Yes, the water fund as well.
You amended both based off of forecasting. Now, we did, remember, we set aside some reserve funding, not knowing what the summer weather was gonna be like and what demand would be. And so we always had that buffer built in if for whatever reason water sales didn't come through the summer, or sales tax.
So when it comes to the water fund, we increased the transfer to the fund for the.
We didn't, on the water fund, only thing we did was increase the expenses, with the idea that we had the surplus from fiscal year 21, and we only moved 100,000 of that surplus and said we're just gonna hold on to that, kind of in fund balance and see. And so if the revenues were able to compensate, then we wouldn't have to get into that fund balance. And so that's what we're hoping, is that the net will be okay, so that we won't have to get into that fund balance. But we do have that piece of that fiscal year 21 surplus that we can still get into if we need to. So it was a total of $221,000 impact by the time we did the salaries and the $50,000 to the asset replacement and $50,000 to CIP.
Okay.
So that's what we were hoping, that revenues would be able to cover that, or lower expenses and higher revenues, or a little bit of both, so that our net would be enough to cover that.
And what is TTHM? What is that?
What is TTHM?
Yeah, what
Total
is that?
trihalomethane.
Nice.
He wants to know if
Sure,
you're
it's
awake
quiz.
this morning.
We made sure you had his coffee this morning.
That was pretty impressive.
That was impressive, I'm gonna say.
I am paying attention. Yeah.
And what's the chemical compound for that?
Hang on, I'm gonna have to look that one up.
Google. So just going through here by category, some notable changes that we had, and these won't be a surprise. So maintenance, 18% over fiscal year 22, but there is a big driver here, and that is the TTHM project that we completed. I believe y'all did a ribbon cutting, and actually I was going to put that picture in here and didn't. But it's time to replace the carbon for those filters, and this is going to be an annual cost, and we talked about this as we implemented that project. So for this fiscal year, we know it's around $190,000. That's for 2 units. So anyway, so we have that in there, and the idea is that we will do 2 each year to keep those fresh instead of doing $400,000 each year. But it's going to be an ongoing operational cost, and that is to keep the TTHM down, keep the filtration better, specifically when we're using river water, right?
Costs more than my Brita.
Yeah, a little bit. But it'd take us a long time to run that through the Brita.
Spread it out across all the customers though, and I'll bet it costs less than your Brita.
Yeah, that's true. So that's the big driver in that category, and we're already working on potentially having to pre-order that also, because it's looking like we're not going to be able to have access to that till maybe December, and that's what they're saying today. So who knows what's going to happen if that gets pushed. So anyway, that's on the table, and that may be coming to you for pre-order, or at least for us to earmark it. Supplies, keep in mind this is chemicals, gas, and any other maintenance supply items and those kind of things. 15% up over 22. And capital outlay up 17%, but I wanna remind you that's different than our CIP budget, so, this is new infrastructure we're putting in the ground. So if we have a new housing development and we go put in 100 new meters, we capitalize all that as one total at the end of the year. So it's not necessarily a project, but it's new that we're gonna put it on the books as an asset. And so that's why we capitalize that. So that's more of just our terminology, so just wanted to clarify how that, what that's involved. So that's again is the pipe meters, and we have seen meters jump as much as 70%, and other meters are only moving 15%. So I don't know what the common denominator is there, but we've done a complete assessment of every meter, every pipe, everything we buy, and there's no magic. It's 12% increase. It's all over the board. So
Is that gonna affect the development services?
it will. And so typically what we do there is we cost that out as far as what the park costs us. And then we take that cost and then we add the labor that it takes to put that in the ground, whatever that is, and then that's the cost of development services. So we're seeing anywhere from a 6 to an 8% increase, so it's not horrible because remember that when we buy something, we disperse it out at average cost. So that's how our inventory keeps up with things. It's not a last in, first out or anything like that. So when you average it, depending on how many we have on hand and when the last time we bought it is, that average cost to the customer is gonna be a little bit less because of the way we disperse it. So we did a lot of calculations on that, and actually I didn't bring that, but I will get you a copy of that fee schedule with those updated fees. But we saw about 6 to 8% on meters and taps, and then less on some other things, just based on what we cost out.
With the carbon replacement being a CIP project, where are we gonna find that on the?
It is not. This is gonna be in operations.
So what we did, we actually, as part of the initial project, we budgeted essentially the first round of material.
Sure.
And then now what we've done, because we've got a fairly good idea of what usage is gonna look like going forward, that was the other piece, is we weren't exactly sure if we were gonna utilize all 4 every year, or if it was gonna be kind of an every other year, how much we were gonna really need. We've got a pretty good data set now that it's been operational for a period of time. And so what we've honed in on is we need about 2 of those 4 replaced every year, and so what we've done is we put that directly into the operational budget. What we try to extract out of the operational budget is if we're going to have wild swings, you know,
Yeah.
where one year we'd have to buy 4 and then the next year 0.
Right.
But since it's 2 every year, what we've done is just went ahead and put it in. No different than we put in other maintenance chemicals.
And same kind of concept with asset replacement. So there's another piece to the water plant that's an asset replacement because it's only gonna replace every 7 to 8 years. And so we don't wanna all of a sudden plug that into an operational budget and we're have a 200% increase, but then next year it's a 200% decrease. So we plug that into asset replacement to keep it more steady. So that way operational is a lot easier to track. So I am on page 7. So for personnel, 11% of over current budget, and again, this is probably the biggest area that you'll see the impact to original budget, because we did have those COLA and market adjustments in there. This does include a new wastewater collection employee that's budgeted for half the year. So I don't know when the last time we've added really an employee to the water fund, but it's been quite a while. So this would be on the, basically maintenance of the sewer lines, is what that department does.
Yeah, so you may recall from a couple of years ago, this division was separated out from the wastewater treatment plant division, and was really intended to change the operational control of the wastewater collection division overall. This half-year new employee essentially will assist with overtime reductions, as well as these guys operate on call. It's a 24/7 because we never know when something may go down, and so there's a significant amount of on-call time that small division is having to maintain right now, and so it just helps disperse that a little bit, so those folks, when they're actually off, they can truly be off.
So also in personnel, you have group insurance, which we're gonna see an increase of 5%. And it does assume just like, so water fund employees are general government employees. And I think sometimes there's confusion because it's 2 different funds, but we're still all general fund employees unless we're public safety. So just parallel to what we did in the general fund, we're assuming an average merit increase of 3% for water fund employees.
What was the group insurance increase last year?
It was right at 5.
percentage-wise?
I went back and looked.
Is that what it's looking like, you
Mhm.
think?
Okay.
Yeah, I'll have that presentation next Tuesday.
Okay,
Yeah,
Cool.
Kim has a lot of information on that.
okay.
But I went back and looked and it was about the same last
Okay.
year. And the plan is for the city to assume any additional costs to employees so that we're not asking employees then to pay. Sorry.
So wait, you're saying
Don't
that
scoop
the-
my whole presentation.
And, so you're saying, I'm sorry,
That's
I'm
fine.
gonna go back to what you were saying on their general fund employees.
General government, it's just a classification, it's just how we're
Oh.
classified.
But in our budget, we see them as an expense item, or they're not in the general fund. as
Correct,
far
so
as-
they're in the water fund.
Okay. That's what I
Just
was
like all our
thinking,
garage
and I got
employees are in the
confused.
garage fund and those things. So public safety is really the only piece, so police and fire, that have their step plan that's separate. Everyone
Right.
else falls under general government for the
Right, I
purpose of
just, I
classification.
think I was just confused by the way that you said that.
Yeah.
General government, not general fund,
Okay.
Right,
but it's a general government employee,
But we're still
same
seeing their
benefits,
expenses
Sure.
same
in
personnel
this fund,
expenses.
not in the
That's correct.
general fund.
Correct.
that's correct. We
Right.
just treat them the same because the only people that get treated different are commissioned public safety. Okay,
And more information will be given on that at the
yes,
benefits trust meeting?
Mhm.
Correct.
Is that what it is?
Kim's got a lot of information for you for that.
I
Alright.
just mentioned.
Yeah, just wanted you to know what's driving that, that percent increase there. Our transfer out, we are gonna see a slight decrease. The, primarily driver there is our debt fund structure, so we're gonna be paying a little bit less debt, this year, and Trina's gonna talk a little bit more of that as we get into the debt piece, but we're just not transferring out as much to the debt fund this year as we did last year. So, just because of the way it's structured, the payments are structured. Okay, so this is kind of what I show you at council, just wanted to give it to you in a categorical format so that you can see it in dollars. I think that makes sense to some people like graphs, I'll try to give it to you each way so that whatever works for you. So what you'll see here is a 5.3% increase on the revenues. In this view, it's a 3.6% increase on expenses, but keep in mind, I'm comparing to current budget. So that does already capture the COLA and market adjustments that we did, and then any line item transfers by category that departments have done throughout the year. The bottom line is not affected by by transfers. We just basically say, I need more money in gas, so I'm moving it out of office supplies or whatever. Just keeps them operating. So this just shows you those increases in a little bit different way. So the like I said, it just gives us the ability to recognize the impact of the COLA and market adjustments. That was $122,000 to this fund, and then also the approved transfers out to CIP and asset replacement, which was $50,000 to each of those funds. But if you back this up and compare it to original, it's 5.3%, just exactly as the revenues are, because we didn't make any adjustments to revenues.
Are you worried about the lower transfer?
No, the lower transfers go straight off of what our debt payments are. So
But to the CIP and the asset replacement?
yes, I am worried about that. And I've got some information on that as we go through. The answer is yes, I'm worried about
I'd
that,
be worried
but
about that too.
We'll talk about
Yeah.
rates when we get to it, but
Okay.
that's
no different than the conversation has been for the last couple of years. Our rate structure is not at a sustainable level. It is behind in regards to asset replacement
I'm gonna give
and
you-
capital projects.
yeah. I'm gonna give you guys a lot of information on that
Yeah.
piece here in a second, because the simple answer is yes. So this is just a graphical view. I know some people like it this way. This just looks at how the revenue sources break out. Water and sewer are still your biggest drivers. In other, you have things like sale of new meters, any customer fees that we have in there, new account fees, if there are late charges, anything like that, to water taps, any of the kind of smaller development services pieces, I guess, falls into that. The next slide is just your expenses, and this is looking at expenses by category, just kind of the same as we do in the general fund. There's a few more lines here, and I was gonna take some of them out and group them, but to me, it matters, and so, just so you can kind of take a look at categorically, how we're spending, money by percentage. So again, total expenditures of 14.4 million, that's up 5.3 over original budget, but again, 3.6 when you compare to the current budget. Do you have questions on that slide? or any of the other ones that we've talked through.
What is services again? 7.4?
So services is gonna be things like, utilities, insurance is in there, professional services of any, contract, print services, when you're talking about utility billing. So just pretty much anything that we hire out or utilities is in that.
Big chunk of our services, obviously, for this business that we run, are the internal services that we provide for HR, and insurance, and accounting, and all those. Those are represented, obviously, in the transfer and
Correct.
general fund transfer. That's right, like very similar to the EIC. The ones that we contract out are directly allocated to that services line item.
Right, you're right, the transfer to the general fund accounts for basically all the things the general fund does for the water fund, and it's
Substantial.
substantial. But because the water fund's an enterprise fund, we actually have to show the money moving.
Right.
If it was all one fund, it wouldn't matter, but since it's two different funds and that's a business type fund, we do have to show the money moving. Okay, so I'm gonna give you a lot of information on these next few slides, so stop me if you wanna talk through it, but this is gonna answer some of the questions, Kim, that you just talked about. So, this just speaks to in September of '21, where we did the multi-year water and sewer rate, because of things that we didn't know. We are proposing that we're gonna make changes to that. Obviously, inflationary factors, fuel costs, supply chain shortages, which we continue to talk about. Future liability forecasting is going on right now, so we actually created a small committee in-house to start talking about some of the things as soon as we get this budget filed, to start answering some of those bigger questions like our, asset replacement, what is our true need 5 years from now, and things like that, so that we can start with that as we start a budget process instead of starting with an operational budget and then backfilling with what's left, right? And so we're trying to kind of revamp that process a little bit. So I really feel like, by sometime in early '23, we'll be bringing that to you at a workshop and just give you our findings and kind of be able to give you more solid number as far as what that looks like. So this next slide here is going back to 2019. So we had New Gen Strategies and Solutions. They did a really intensive rate study for those of you who were here during that point in time. Basically, they took what we had, what our consumption was, what our rates are, and then all of our operational costs. But then they went further than that and did asset costs, CIP projects, things we were going to need to sustain long term. And so, without really considering inflationary factors, I went back and looked at that model that they sent us back in August of 2019, and their indication was that this year, 2023, we would need to be at $7.1 million in water sales and $6.4 million in sewer sales. Not quite there, but you have to remember that they really recommended some hefty increases, and council kind of was like, okay, hold on. So we met somewhere in the middle and kind of compromised with the idea that we keep stepping that up. But then we did that in 2020. In 2021, we did nothing. And then in 2022, we were super conservative because we were this point of the year, we were still dealing with COVID. And so we didn't really know the impact. So we did very small 2% base rate and 2% tiers and even 0 on a couple of our base rates, on a couple of our tier rates last year. So we thought that compromise was going to work moving forward, but then who knew what the COVID was going to happen, and then who knew this past year was going to happen this way. So in 2020, we implemented a base rate change of $3.18, and that sounds like a lot, but we also included 1,000 gallons of water at that point. So we redid the structure to where you weren't just paying the base rate and then the tiers. We started including that so that we weren't hurting that single person household, wasn't being impacted by the tier increase. And we've kind of continued that methodology to kind of protect that user. I think we've done a pretty good job of doing that. Tiered rate at that point in time ranged anywhere from 23 cents on the lowest tier to $1.63 on the highest tier of that 50,000 gallon rate. And so the idea was to slowly start moving to this idea of water conservation built into our rates, and that really lines up with what we're doing in 2050. And you can kind of see what's happening now is that people will do what's right if they know it's needed to be done, and we're seeing that. And so this just goes a little step further to encourage them. If you're going to use 50,000 gallons of water a month, it's going to cost you more than it is if you're going to run a household. So we did no change in 2021. We talked about the changes to 2022. And sewer kind of aligned with this. I didn't go into the sewer because it would be a lot of detail, but it was a little smaller adjustments on the sewer side than on the water side.
So essentially, in a nutshell, although we had a multi-year rate structure that was recommended several years ago, it hasn't been followed. There've been some modest changes, but because of the world changing over the last 3 years, we just haven't been able to follow it as closely as what was recommended pre-pandemic.
Well, and I think from my recollection, one of the reasons to do that was because when that study came out, like you were saying, there was some sticker shock there. And so the idea of implementing change over a small period of time, we thought that would give us some predictability, and it would kind of cover the city as far as at least pushing that information out, that it was being transparent in a way that we've got to catch up, and this is how we're planning to do that. But that being said, I mean, that's just my recollection of when we started to implement that, because we knew that rates were going to be changing, and we just wanted everyone to be aware that we were going to be going up.
That's right.
So.
And
Well,
it
and
was-
doing it over time too,
Exactly.
and not doing it all at one
All
time. I
at
think that
once.
was the
That
big
was
concern, because
very-
it was a pretty big
Right, it was a
Right.
big
increase, and then protecting that lower user, and I think that's been,
Yes.
that's kind of been a priority, I think for
Right.
council and for staff from day one,
right.
and still has been as we go
Right.
through this, so.
No, I think it was a good way to do it.
It was.
And at the time,
Yes.
absolutely.
But there's just so many things we didn't know,
That's right.
and next year maybe something else we don't know,
That's
so we just
exactly
have to, we just have to shift.
So we're not gonna be looking at another 3-year now, we're just gonna be looking at a single year
For right now.
for right now,
Right.
until we have some more
Right.
modeling and.
Well, exactly. We need we're enhancing the modeling, and we also need council feedback really on this year, and that helps really kind of show both on this year as well as some feedback in regards to the capital asset program and the asset replacement program, because that really helps us drive that trajectory on what that looks like.
Right. But we are hoping to bring back some sort of multi-year to you pretty soon, but we needed to kind of get through
Sure.
today and get some good feedback, and that way we know, what are our priorities, so we know, what does that revenue need to look like? Because we're using it all, I will tell you that. It's not, we're not just, socking it away and transferring it like, we really should be, so.
I think the key message with the multi-year rate structure was that there were increases that were indicated in each of those out years. What we're needing to do is, again, it's the murky crystal ball, right? It's that we're going to have to adjust those out years. But we still think there's a lot of value in having
Yeah, and
the
now
multi-year.
we've got rainy years and dry years and.
That's right.
And oddly
Yeah.
enough, as Trina was going through
And
that.
that's not what we would have thought.
No, and she can talk to you about this, but as she was going through all this modeling and comparing all this data year to year and consumption, we're seeing less,
I mean, we just assumed that we would
That's right.
have
more in a
much
dry
higher
year.
consumption in a dry year.
Not necessarily the case.
And
Yeah.
that's not what's happening. So, which is a good thing, because we're not having to do anything drastic
Yeah.
from a control piece. People are
Right.
doing that themselves,
That's
which
right.
is, it's a good news story.
Yeah,
That's right.
I know.
Much more
much more
than
brown
we've
and
seen
yellow.
in the past. So when you were talking about the 6 million gallons down to 3 million gallons, and how people are self-conserving without us having to go into stage 1 waters. I mean, you could see it.
Mhm.
You
And
could
you also
see
have to
it.
think of what the reuse pond takes off.
Yeah.
Because of the water that we're
Yeah.
utilizing from the reuse pond onto those areas that are large areas that
That
would
we
be
have to,
watering.
yeah.
Doing their job.
That's right.
That's right.
So, okay, so moving on to the next, still maintaining this new rate structure. I'm on page 13, by the way. Still include the 1,000 gallons of water, not change the rate structure. I think that was a good move, because that base rate really kind of stabilizes the revenue a little bit. But keep in mind that the base rate is only, I don't even think it's 20% of our total. So we're not really there as far as having good stability, but it's a start as far as building that in.
On a very, very basic level for Councilmember Herring.
Anytime.
Well, I
Make it more
mean,
basic for her.
no, change.
Yes.
Cliff notes.
No, change, or for any, I mean, I don't know when all this happened, I think may have just been Judy and I on council at the time, but before, I mean, the rate structure was a major shift in the way that we were collecting for water. So on a just very high level, explain how that affected, how that structure changed, I guess.
So, before we changed in 2020, we had basically, you had your monthly account fee, which was like $12, if I remember correctly. And basically, that was your monthly account fee, and then any water you used, you were billed for. So
Starting from the first
starting
gallon.
from the first gallon, and so from 0 to 6,000 gallons was one rate, and then from 6,000 to 15 was another rate, and on up. And so when we did this shift, basically we said, well, we're going to increase the base rate by $3, but you're going to get 1,000 gallons of water in there, which would have only cost you $3.41 at the time. So you actually got a break for the customer who is using 600 or 700 gallons of water a month. So if you're living by yourself and doing, 5 loads of laundry, then basically you were getting a break on your water. So, and also you knew what your water bill was going to be every single month. Now, when you lapsed that 1,000, then we went back to the tiered structure, but we changed the tiers up a little bit so that your higher tiers were actually being billed a little bit more. So those guys using 15,000, 25,000 that are, watering golf courses or their, lawn, they were paying a higher rate than people who were just using their water for household use. That was the idea. So water conservation, first of all, but then stability by changing the base rate, because we knew automatically that money is a given. So when you're doing revenue forecasting, we knew based on number of accounts, we have this. Then you have to forecast off consumption, which is what's really hard. That's the big always. I can tell you what it is if it was right now. I can even give you a 3-year average. But if it rains different, or it doesn't rain, or it floods, all those numbers,
Is there a different tier level or rate structure for the reuse pond water?
Correct. So all those reuse customers are on contract with the city, and they have to be approved by TCEQ, and Stuart will talk to you a lot more about that. But they're basically on individual contracts, and so depending on, I believe, what they put into the infrastructure and all that, it was a contract done between Public Works and Legal to come up with what those rates were. And that it only feeds those areas, so not just anybody can tap into that right now, because there's some pretty strict regulations about moving that water from A to B and how that looks. Make sense?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
So,
Wasn't trying to be
no, that's what we need, and I think it's.
Well, and it was just to stabilize it more, because it is so unstable. The more we thought about increasing the base rate, the more stability you have over the accounts. So it built in just that little extra.
And when you apply the growth factor, that helps a lot, because you can use that more as a budgeting tool than you can if you're just using it on consumption. Okay, so again, increased volumetric rates to really emphasize those higher tiers like we talked about in line with Kerrville 2050, because that's a big action item in there is long-range water planning and water conservation. Still using a variable rate structure, so we still are heavily impacted by weather. So as we kind of slowly transition to wherever, we end up in multiple years, and that will continue to get a little bit stronger from a stability standpoint. But again, customers are self-monitoring right now, which, it's been shocking, but it's really, it's happening. Okay, so I think I just have one more thing for you, and then I'm gonna turn rates over to Trina. Waterfront Expenditures, as EA said, they're overwhelmingly fixed, so it doesn't matter if we use 10 gallons of water or 10 million gallons of water, we still have to maintain the pipes in the ground, the infrastructure and the meters and those kind of things. So again, why it's so important that water is a little more stable, so that we can budget a little bit better. Aging infrastructure and assets are growing, so we're not putting a whole lot of new pipe in the ground on a regular basis, and so I brought 2 examples of things that I just saw in the news and thought they were interesting. So I'm sure y'all saw the break in Odessa. That was a huge deal, and they were out of water for 48 hours for the whole city, and they said that it was aging infrastructure, and so their pipes were more than 60 years old, which maybe Stuart will correct me, but everything I read said that the cast iron pipes are good for about 50. So, if you think about where we are and maybe what we need to be doing proactively, I don't think that I want to. Would you agree with that, Stuart?
Do you know how old all our pipes are, Stuart?
We got a fairly decent range of age.
Do you literally pretty much know?
No, that's when they were installed. And we have a cast iron pipe, asbestos concrete, PVC. There's a bunch of different kinds, and they're all over the board as to how old they are. In generality, the older parts of town have older pipes in them, right? So the downtown area, the Doyle area, all those they have older pipes, because that's where Kerrville started, so. And that's where we see most of our breaks and leaks and stuff at, so.
We've got a pretty extensive presentation for you guys next week at the wastewater master plan on Tuesday at the workshop, and so we actually, as different from previous master planning efforts, as a part of the scope for this one, we did a significant investment in looking at the age of pipes and really tracking a heat map of where we're doing repairs around town, and so it's pretty fascinating data.
Yeah, so we won't get that deep into it, but Stuart will with you guys next week. But the point was, we found 2 major cities that had 2 major problems because they just weren't being
I don't
proactive.
want this to be our next street issue.
No.
You know?
Okay.
I don't wanna be the council that council kicked the can on water infrastructure, now look
Right.
at us.
Exactly. But I think there's just kind of a fine line
There is.
between what do you
But
do
I
and what's
mean,
the right move.
Right,
You
I
know,
agree.
so-
I agree.
You're gonna say it.
Yeah. I don't wanna give, they will say that, but I don't want it to be true.
Yes. There you go.
So water wastewater master plan update is in progress, and as EA said, Stuart's team will be bringing that to you guys soon. But really, one of the things we're gonna be doing in the fall is just, again, start to look at, what's aging, what's out there, and not just from that point, but pumps. How many pumps do we have in the ground that are over X years old? And, what are we doing to be proactive about if something breaks, we have something to go out there and replace it with, and those kind of things. So that'll be more in our asset replacement model, and that's one of the things we're really gonna be working hard on this fall. Okay, I'm gonna hand you over to Trina and her hard work where it came to all of these consumption information, and what we're proposing to you as rates. And there's a lot of information here, but I think we can circle back to any of these slides that we need to and revisit those.
Okay, so the 2023 rates we are proposing are basically a 5.5% increase on the base charge. So customers are currently at $16. They would go to $16.88. That's 88 cents difference. We were looking at obviously maintaining our Kerrville 2050 water supply strategy on conservation. So looking at the chart over to the right, you can see where how many accounts fall in those tiered consumptions. So the obvious change gathers at 15,000 and up. So we are considering those the higher tiers, 15,000 plus. So basically 3% on the tiers up to 15,000 and 5% beyond that.
Can I ask you a question? Since you did a deep dive on this, out of the first tier of 1,105 accounts, and this is on average, I suppose, is that right?
Correct.
Well, it's based on a certain month, like she pulled them in
This-
a
on
couple
the
of different
month.
months.
Okay,
Right.
alright, okay, oh, January, okay.
So-
Yeah,
gotcha.
she pulled them in a few different months.
Okay.
We took January because that is typically the true household consumption months, the winter averaging period. So this is strictly more aligned with household consumption. So obviously there's less customers watering this time of the year versus May and June. Within the 15,000 plus picks up at 600 customers.
So I guess I'm curious just on the 1105 number. I'm just curious is there a way that you can tell, like for our house we have 2 water meters. One is irrigation and one is for household. Is there a good way you can detect like how much of that, because I know we're gonna be in the first tier on the irrigation part, but not the household part. So if I look at that number, that's not necessarily 1105 households.
It's accounts.
Right. But because we have multiple accounts.
So your irrigation is not included in this. This is
Okay.
looking at residential meters only.
Okay,
So on
okay.
your irrigation
Okay.
meter, for example, there's no sewer charged on that, which is the benefit
Okay.
of having an irrigation meter
Okay.
separately.
So I can assume that this really is a household.
That is a household,
Okay,
absolutely.
that's good. That's
So
what I wanted
this
to know.
this is households and anything that we're classify as residential.
Okay.
So like multi-unit apartments are also classified as residential, because they're also subject to the sewer averaging. So she looked at, and like she said, she has June's for you too, because the big thing is, unlike you, a lot of people have 1 meter. So
Right.
they're doing their household on it, but they're
Right.
also irrigating on it. So we
Right.
thought it was important to look at this month because we know this is not an irrigation month. And that way you're looking at kind of what's true for household use.
Okay.
So if they go up in the summer, that's gonna be, the assumption would be that that's primarily irrigation. And so they're not gonna be impacted by household water use as much as they
Okay.
would be if they were irrigating, if that makes sense.
It does make sense.
I think a good way to look at it too is the 0 to 1,000 is like a single person family. And then the second tier, there's 2 people, and the third tier is like two kids and 2
Typically.
adults. And so it kind of ratchet. And as you look across the board, that's kind of the way they play out. And then where they've broken it is where irrigation, those people start using irrigation as well.
Okay.
And so you got to get a feel for where,
Yeah, no,
what the
that's good.
households look like.
That's what I mean, that's what I wanted to hear you say. I mean,
And we
to-
focused heavily on residential because that's primarily the people who would be affected because,
Right.
you know, out of our, nearly 12,000 accounts, when you're looking at the large bulk of them, we only have about 1,600 commercial accounts and maybe 500 to 600 true irrigation accounts like yours. And so the large impact is gonna be to the average citizen.
Sure.
That's why we want to
That's,
look at it
I'm glad that it's broken
from a
down that
household
way.
standpoint.
And you could, I mean, to some extent, you could say that irrigation is not a mandatory.
Correct, and that's why we were really looking at, what do you have control over?
What do you have to?
Correct.
what do you- yeah.
We typically see 15 to 2,000 gallons per person in the household for an overall total gallons consumed in the household. So that's just something to note.
How much did you say
15 to 2,000,
per person?
yes.
Average residential users 5,300 for this last year. It's actually a net reduction. It's gone down. It used to be, I think last year it was 5,800. So again, it just goes to show the reduction
So
in
when you're
demand that
talking
we've
about,
seen.
okay, when you're talking about the reduction, okay.
So you can see that's another
That
way that we're
helps.
really saying
Well,
people are
yeah,
backing
that
off.
helps disaggregate everything, cause I had some
Mhm.
questions about all of that, so
Yeah.
that's good.
Yeah, and we can sure give you, because we gather this information every month after billing, how many irrigation accounts do we have and what are they using by tier, and because we gather that every month just through a water activity.
Does an
that we do.
irrigation account hit the same? this-
No, the rate structure's a little bit
Structure's
different on that, for irrigation, cause it's straight irrigation, there's no sewer attached to that, and commercial's a little bit different too, but, all very similar, but they play small parts in the overall, residential's obviously the big,
Well, right, sure.
the big point of contention always, and so the most questions and also the most impact to revenue, so.
You can see too, we had kind of a dark line that separated out the 6,000 to 15,000 and then the 15,000 and above type category. That's also where we saw a differentiation in what the proposed rate element is. As you can see, it drops off significantly in the number of residential accounts. For whatever reason, we suspect the vast majority of these users are really, they're utilizing that water for irrigation. That's what's pushing them up into those upper tiers. And again, it's January, so they're really keeping the things green there through the winter. But again, it towards the conservation motivation, this rate structure continues to promote that.
So yes, we will, back to what Kim asked, we will follow kind of suit on the other scales. So for irrigation, commercial, it will follow the same type of strategy. 15,000 plus, it's going to kick into a higher.
Okay.
So this moderate watering, they're not gonna see much of an increase. If they're, have a golf course lawn, you're gonna see a bigger increase.
Well, mine's brown, so.
Mine
you
is
don't
too.
get much money out of me.
Mine is too.
Conservation rates, right?
Rates are
Rate
best.
structure's working.
Okay, so on the sewer side, and this is mainly residential here, same strategy, 5.5% increase on the base charge. They're currently at $15 per account. It's going to $15.83, and then they get that first 1,000 gallons free into that averaging, and it'll be $5.83 per 1,000 gallons. So that's a 17-cent difference per 1,000 gallons they're billed on.
Okay, now I have a question on this too. Just a basic kind of ideology question. If my memory serves, we're typically always ahead on the sewer. Commonly behind on the water. So if we're ahead on the sewer and we're increasing by 5.5, which I know is a small increase, but are we continuing to try and model that so that we have more stability on sewer in case we're behind on water?
Well, and the hope is, because we went back and looked at like a 5-year history, well, actually went further than that. We went all the way back to 2016 on water history and sales and looked at how many times we haven't hit what our target was, and kind of restructured our thinking based on that to say we can't keep continuing to budget water with too many unknowns. Like, let's give us
So we're just
something that
gonna
we feel like is a
stabilize
little
here?
more solid.
Yeah.
And then stabilize sewer to where we really know where it is. I mean, because we don't want to go into every budget season saying, well, it's okay, sewer will carry us.
Right, that's
We
what I
want
was
to try to
thinking.
flatten that out a little bit.
Okay.
So even with this increase, we feel like the revenue that we came up out of this is true. Because sewer's a lot easier to predict because
Right.
it's solid for so many months of the year. So you could take what we are right now as our sewer average for residential, and you know that's going to be your dollars for, and minus an account dropping here or there.
Right.
But then you know for X number of months a year from April forward, then that rate's going to change up or down, and we don't know what that is. And sometimes that's where we get into that overage or we've never been under on sewer, but typically if our sewer averages go down, then you might see revenues drop a little bit, and you would kind of hope they would average out if they were up one year and down the next, because we have that mid-year adjustment. That change doesn't take place till mid-year. So that's always kind of a question mark, is how much are people are watering, and then if they're watering during winter averaging months, then the sewer average is going to go up. And if they're really conservative, and I think we did a pretty good job this past year of putting that out there to people and reminding them we're in sewer averaging months, and we did see a little bit of a decrease on our sewer average overall. So, just trying to figure out how that's going to impact overall. But to your question, yes, we don't want to keep going into every budget year saying we think we're
Sewer's
going to get
gonna
here on
cover it.
water, but sewer's going to cover it. And so we've tried to do the best we could to come up with the best consumption or assumption for consumption that we could to hopefully get a little closer on
true.
water. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
But that goes back to the same conversation with water. One little thing can happen and everything changes.
So that sewer averaging, these obviously won't take effect until the March averaging time and hit customers' April bills at this rate, proposed rates.
And those are average January, February, March?
December,
Or December,
January,
January,
February.
So that means if I am in the first tier over, and you take the lowest month, right? Is that right?
We
Or
average those three.
You average the 3 months. So if I am a single household and I average 1,000 or less, then monthly I am going to pay $1,583 for
That's
the
correct.
remainder of the year.
That's
Until
correct.
we're re-averaged.
Don't
have to necessarily be a single household.
You just have to be in that too.
Right, I'm just.
You could be a family of four and in there, but you
Yeah.
probably wouldn't be.
Right.
We also see winter Texans. We also see people who maybe live out of state in the winter, and so they have vacancies during this time of the year. So we see those kind of things. And I'll say this too: our department works closely with customers who may, let's say, you had a break of some sort
Right.
in February. You filled your swimming pool in February, something like that. They come in and talk to us and let us know what's going on, and we take that into consideration whenever we're doing their sewer averaging. So we don't just let the computer spit out a number, we let the computer spit out a number, and then we go through it and see what's reasonable, and then try to dig back into those accounts to make sure if there's some anomaly going on, that we're contacting those customers and trying to work through that. So we're not just saying, well, that's what it is. And we do work with multiple customers, and since we've started doing that process, we've had less complaints, because people feel like they can come in and say, here's my receipt for and we can pull data and say he had just an out weird.
Well, it helps too when there's leakage.
Right.
Because I know our business had to come back and talk to the city and say, we had this leak and we can't, water consumption is water consumption,
That's right.
But to understand that was a one-time thing and to look at being able to adjust that
That's
on
correct.
a monthly basis if
That's correct.
necessary.
And we do that on a regular basis, actually. We do have to charge for water by state law. However, when there's something that happens that's large like that, we do work with customers on a regular basis to help them out for those unusual circumstances.
That advanced metering system also gives us really good
Yes.
data, so we're able to see, if you've got a spike every day at 7 a.m.,
Your water
we're
ain't-
pretty sure it's an irrigation system
Yes.
versus a large spike that may be caused by a leak or pool fill or any other thing. So we've got some great data to verify the stories sometimes.
We're
And
pulling
thank
almost
you, guys.
80% AMI now, so the girls can, if you went in there right now, if your meter's on AMI already, they can tell you right now what your usage has been by hour for the last, long as you want. So that's super helpful, we don't have to send somebody out to do it.
I need a 7 to 8 o'clock child average.
15 minutes to shower.
You're
But
taking too
thank
long.
you for working with people, because that customer service.
Sure, and that's, I would say our front office staff is.
And I'll tell people
they're
that
super.
when they, anytime they talk about a bill or having a leak, how much they're wanting.
Right, and if it's something we can't control, at least we have an opportunity to meet with
Somewhere.
that customer, educate, talk them through the process, because it's complicated, it's a lot to know.
So on page 17, speaking of education, we kind of put this slide in here just to kind of break down how your bill is calculated. Just because you are a 15,000 gallon consumption customer, we're not going to bill you straight across the board at that $4.65 for all 15,000 gallons. We bill on a tiered scale. So your first 1,000 gallons is billed into that base rate, and then your next 5,000 gallons will be at that. So let's take this 30,000 gallon total. Your first 5,000 gallons will be at $3.51. Your next 9,000 gallons will be at $4.65. And if you slide across, you can see those total dollars for that tier. And then the next 10,000 is at $5.92, and then that final $5,000 or 5,000 gallons, is at $7.40. So you add your base charge to that, and you have that total water bill at $172 for the 30,000 gallons. So this could get a little bit confusing, but on the next section to the right for the sewer, the full 30,000 gallons there is billed out, but as a residential customer, obviously you'll be billed at your sewer average. But we just kind of want to show what 30,000 gallons, how it would be billed out in full.
We just didn't want anybody to think, well, if you're a 15,000 gallon user, you're paying the 15,000 gallon
Yeah.
rate for every gallon that you use. So it's tiered, and so you can go over some months or under some months, and it's going to vary just depending on where you fall in that scale. And we use this also just as a rate checker anytime we're trying to explain it to a customer or let them know, this is how your bill was calculated, because they can't do the rate times the gallons and come up with this. So I just think this is helpful. We also use this anytime we're changing rates to make sure we change them in the system. We do testers to make sure, and then we do test bills to make sure that the system is calculating out the bill structure like it should. So just thought this was a good tool to add there.
This next slide is really important. We included this one for you guys just to show really what that combined rate is between water and sewer, really give you kind of more of a total bill comparison.
Yeah, so taking the average household consumption at 5,300 gallons, currently that customer would be paying $70 a month for their water and sewer bill. If we go to the proposed rates, it would be $72.87 per month, so a $2.87 difference per month. And overall, all of these are 4 to 5% increases, depending on what tier you fall into. So that would equate to approximately $35 a year they would see increase.
So again, the two main philosophical goals that council implemented several years ago, and this continues that trajectory, is one, to increase stability for base operational components, right? The fixed cost of business, so to speak. And you can see that really in that top tier. Again, that's what we've been referring to as kind of that single fixed income type household. It's $1.71 difference per month because it's only the base rate change, which equates to basically a $20 change on an annual basis. And then as you go up into more and more consumption, the rates become on a nominal level more expensive. The more water you're using, the more expensive that water is, and that again promotes conservation. And then we're also not having to spend dollars, the community overall, on new water supply, right? Because conservation is one of our key strategies as a water supply strategy.
Okay, and we wanted to put this slide in here we benchmark other cities, see what what their rates are and what they're doing this year. Not a lot, everybody, all other cities are in the same time frame we are, they're knee deep in budget trying to decide what they're gonna do. So even looking at their current rates for fiscal year 22 and us plugging in our proposed rates, there on the chart, you see Kerrville to the far right, there with Fredericksburg. He looked at all the surrounding hill country areas, and these figures, we took the same 5,300 gallons, plugged it into their tier scales, and got the calculation here. Fredericksburg, they do not have a water treatment plant. They're run off of well water, so they're currently looking at going to stage 4 restrictions.
I think it's important. We'll talk about it again next week at the workshop, but I can guarantee you, compared to these other cities, we have a vastly more complex system because we're in the hill country. We have more pump stations, we have more lift stations. We have a more diversified water supply, which is a great benefit. That's why we haven't had to go into additional water conservation. But there's a cost to all those. And yet, I can guarantee you, when we looked at this 4 years ago, we were way over here on the right then too. And so again, it
stayed there.
It gets to that stability and the sustainability of where we are from a water rate standpoint. And if we're going to continue to maintain that diversification in our water system.
We don't put this on the website,
No, this is just internal, that Trina and her team.
but if somehow we need to get that story out.
We can
Because
certainly
it's
include it in
important.
the overall budget presentation. We can
Yes,
certainly do that.
very important.
I'll bet our partner news agencies would happy to put out that information.
Say no.
And we should say a prayer every day for the situation we are in.
Yeah. Well, it's not by accident, right? It's by
That's
decades
true.
of planning, and
and
it's
foresight,
by
yes.
efficient foresight and efficient operations, quite frankly, from our water fund operators. So they do a great job.
Just an interesting take from a personal standpoint. Back in the early 90s, when I was raising 4 kids and had, 12 loads of laundry a week and all that stuff, my water bill was about $72 a month. And now here it is 32 years later, and my bill is still $72 a month.
Those kids move out.
Man, I need to get my kids out.
Yes, yes.
Okay, on this next slide, we just threw in some helpful resources. Sometimes, even if a customer doesn't have a leak, we're not giving adjustments. There's other needs out there, and financial assistance is provided in the community. So we currently, as a city, have the neighborhood assistance program, where citizens can donate to other neighbors, basically. And we collect those dollars, and we then turn over to CAM, Christian Assistance Ministries, and they are the manager of those
So
funds.
that's what we do with them.
Yes,
That's correct.
I didn't realize that we gave it to GAN.
So when you're doing online, and it's just for utility assistance, is that correct?
Correct.
So when you're doing an online bill payment, and it's just automatically, coming out every month, is there a way to designate just to round up or, whatever?
I'm not sure we can do that online. Can it build in automatically? Can we put like a contract
Maybe a
on the
contract.
account that automatically says every month you're gonna add $2 to our bill? Yeah, we can talk to
I mean,
Mary
I
about that.
don't want it to be.
It's not complicated.
Cost.
It would just be a customer having to tell
It'd
us,
be
hey,
really
every month.
easy. It'd be really easy. Just, because someone like me would be happy to
Sure.
contribute that small amount every month, but we're
It
just
would have
having
to be a
auto
set
pay,
number.
so it's.
Yeah, it would have to be a set number, so like if you
Instead
said I
of
want
just
$1
rounding
a
up.
month or $5 a month or
Yeah.
whatever you said, it would automatically be billed to your
Okay.
account every month, and that would certainly be an educational piece we could put out there. Or people can stop by and just make a payment to that account too. Yeah, I'll let Mary know about that, and we can put out some information, because that is interesting, because we do have a lot of auto pay.
Yeah, 'cause it's
Customers.
just out of sight, out of mind.
Correct.
It's, you're
Right,
not
and-
checking a box and making a check out for more than.
Right, and I believe K-Pub does an automatic roundup unless
Yes.
you tell them not to.
They do
Right.
too.
We don't do that, and
Right.
so, but yeah, adding that on to customers who chose to would be really good. Okay,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
for sure, and you just set it up as a little different
Like a
piece
dollar a
within
month
your
or
bill, and
whatever.
you see it on your bill as assistance.
put
heard
something
that.
out there, make it known. So currently that program brings in about $2,000 annually. I mean, but if put the word out, it can grow, and we're handing that over for others who need assistance. We also have St. Vincent de Paul. We see a lot of activity from Salvation Army helps others, and South Central Texas Community Council is also out there. They have a new big program. They're getting some state funding, and we recently were in conversation with them, so they're reaching out to help a lot more in the community. And we also have a no penalty program for those that are on a set income every month, or teachers or administrators that get paid just once a month. You know, their timing of their bill due date and versus when they get paid. So those are other resources we have to help citizens in the community who need extra help. All right, and that's all pertaining to the
Any
water
questions
rate.
on any of that stuff? I know that's a lot.
What about the other assistance program? This needs to be
Yeah,
publicized.
we put it on our bill message from time to time, but I do think we could put it out there and say you could opt in.
I get a bill every month.
Yeah.
Okay, but with all of the privacy policies and stuff, let's say that a couple winds up in nursing homes for rehab or whatever, okay? And you know that there are bills that are coming up that need to be paid, utility bills and such, that they are not gonna be able to pay because they're in the hospital. As a citizen who may want to either pay that bill using their funds or try and get assistance to pay that bill while these people are in the hospital, how does one do that?
We do track those if we know who they are, and you'll remember for a little while, we worked with the Community Foundation, especially during the winter storm, and did some work with them. They left that to us, so basically they said, here's X number of dollars, and we want your staff to do this because you know what the utility accounts are and who's who and those things. And as much as they handle them, you know, those pop up to the top pretty quick when we're working through those. As far as handing out information, we're very careful about that. Let's say you had a neighbor and you said, I want to pay their water bill. You can certainly do that, and we do have that happen more frequently than you might think. Or if there's, you know, we've had it to where, you know, my neighbor's a single mom and I just want to pay her water bill, but we just apply that payment and go on down the road. We won't give you any information on the account, but
Right.
simply to pay a bill, we can certainly do that.
Okay.
If that was your intention, and we do see that happen from time to time. You know, we've even talked about, do we want to have an internal fund that basically staff could use that discretion? It just works so well letting Cam manage that money, and then, you know, they're doing all the vetting and taking care of all of that. We have such a good relationship with them. It's just easier for us not to handle that in-house, not to say it can't happen. So if that's something that, you know, council want to do moving forward in future years, we could certainly look at something like that. It's just the relationship we have with them works really good. But to answer your question, yes, and that does happen. Specifically, if people know of circumstances. Sometimes we know and sometimes we don't know, just depending. If their bills start adding up and we start asking questions, then a lot of times we find out information from relatives or emergency contacts and those kind of things.
Okay, so because that's what I'm concerned about right now with a particular address is they both are hospitalized for at least 6 weeks. So has their bill been paid, and is there a danger of their service being cut off
Right.
because nobody knows that they are incapacitated right
Right.
now and cannot pay that bill?
Right, and a lot of times we ask people to call and let us know that because we have the ability to go in, A, and put notes on an account so that we know what's going on, and B, to remove penalties
Okay.
if that's the case and there's extraordinary circumstances. So we have a lot of different avenues that we can work through that. So if you know that, you know, we can visit
Okay.
after, we can dig into that a little bit and figure out what we can do to help. So we work with a variety of situations all the time, and every one of them is a little bit different. So, but we're always doing something to make exceptions, stretch things out, put people on large bill payouts, help find them assistance, and our utility staff is great at pointing people in the right direction, or even calling assistance programs and saying, hey, you know, this person doesn't have a vehicle, or, you know, here's extenuating circumstances, and we can certainly do that too, to make sure the resources line up correctly.
Our staff is nimble and they're caring and they work with folks, right? Customer service is our number one priority.
Well, and I feel good about where you're sending them because they also have they have things in place. It's not, they're not just giving money away every month to somebody. Their requirements and they handle that well.
Well, and they have other resources too that we
Yes.
don't have, and so sometimes making that connection opens the door for additional resources, and so I think that's really important. And as Trina was saying, this state funding, that's new. In fact, we just signed our agreement with them this week, but I'm pretty sure that they actually will pay multiple months. And it's through the Community Coalition of South Texas, but they're getting money from state funding, and I'm not sure where their source is, so I don't want to speak to that. But I know that it is outside funding, and they're really pushing hard to help people, and it's water and electricity both. So, and they're doing a lot of money across Texas in different regions. So, we're hopeful that that's going to be a pretty big resource for us as well.
And we're gonna see a greater need for that with the way prices are, food prices, gas prices, everything.
That's right.
We're fortunate to have good partners that
Yes.
can help folks that are in need. Let's move on to water asset replacement. Keep moving along.
Yeah, so this is just a quick look. I know we talked about this a little bit in the last one, but you can see here, I don't know why it didn't print, but that $250,000 at the top, that budgeted transfer in, that had a red square around it somewhere. That's what we had budgeted for the transfer in this year. Last year we had 300 budgeted in. Remember we did transfer $50,000 mid-year from surplus from 2021, and depending on how the year ends up and what we have, maybe coming back to you to ask for more of a transfer. The idea was to try to implement some rates that took care of the needs but had as minimal impact as we could on the citizens. But one of those impacts is transfers, and so I can just tell you looking forward. So basically, not a lot of big purchases in the water fund, but replacing a backhoe, that was $109,000. That bid was a couple of months ago, so I'm going to assume that's probably higher. A mower, which we do go through a lot of mowers in water production and water reclamation, just because of all the sites that they take care of. And then the $280,000 is for those two Xenon plant filters, and I am certainly not an expert there. So, sir, do you want to tell us what those are real quick? Those are the
membranes for the Xenon, so it's an ultrafiltration plant, and it's we gotta change them out every 7 to 10 years was the threshold that they told us, depending on the quality of the water and the temperature of the water, and they're just timing out. It's time to replace them.
We put those in here instead of operations, kind of as we talked before. This isn't an every year expense, so because of that, we'll plan those out as we're talking about future forecasting, and so we know when those are going to hit again, and we can start kind of planning that ahead of time instead of, we have to do it this year kind of situation. And then the pump for the lift station, so that pump is replacing a pump within one of our lift stations, one of our larger lift stations actually, and that pump we calculated is at least 23 years old. We're not sure exact year, but we know it's to the end of its useful life, and so we want to make sure with supply that if that pump goes out, we don't have a section of town that is without wastewater collection. So that's what that pump is.
These big numbers, those are asset replacement
All
numbers,
of these.
this whole section.
Yes. So you can see our beginning fund balance there at the top.
Oh, look, it says asset replacement at the top.
Black and bold.
Okay.
That 491,000 there, that's the beginning of 23 fund balance. That's assuming that we pay for everything in 22, which we know that's not going to happen. So we'll be asking for a budget amendment for things we couldn't buy because of supply and demand. And then you can kind of just see going through a little bit of revenue from asset disposal. So if we buy something new, 9 times out of 10 we sell the piece that we're replacing unless there's a reason to keep it for a backup. And then existing leases, those are budgeted in 2022. Again, we have not received any of those. So if we don't spend that, then that payment will then roll back into fund balance for beginning of 23.
But our fund balance is going down.
It's going down.
It is a drawdown, and the reason it's a drawdown is what we spoke to earlier. Is that just even looking back across the last 5 or 6 years, we have every year just made revenues, and so if we are not putting money into the savings account to be able to accommodate
That
these type
really
of activities.
concerns. I don't know about y'all, but that really concerns me.
And quite
I
frankly, it's
mean-
because our base rate isn't where the base rate needs to
Well,
be.
I mean, do we need to have a conversation about that? I mean,
We certainly can. I mean, we were trying to, we knew what the multi-year plan said, and we did that, still being in the midst of COVID, and we just don't know.
Well,
But-
trying to be sensitive. So I do not want to be. I'm not being insensitive. But if we're talking about a low rate user, and we're talking about 88 cents a month
On the water.
on the water, I mean the percentage looks big,
Right.
but the 88 cents is not big. Am I off in saying that, or
No.
is that? I mean, am I being sensitive to those low rate users by saying, asking them to pay 88 cents more a month is not a huge increase to their budget? And should we consider whether or not we make the base rate $16 instead of $15.88 or $15.80?
And what would the impact be? So the difference
I
is
don't
about
know.
8. Well, I can tell you in about real quick. So if you look at your total residential accounts and then apply the difference, that would be the excess per month over 12 months to the. You figure that in a second. I'll let her figure that and just give you a residential number, just so just
that's
for.
probably not going to be super significant.
It's not, but when you look at, I kind of did a little looking ahead forecast here, and again, this is not real intensive. This is just kind of what we already knew. Looking in 24, about 65,000 in leases, and give or take 500,000 in purchases. So when we're starting the year for 24 with $214,000, and we need 565. We would need to know going into next budget year before we do anything, we have to establish that transfer because we can't depend on surplus every year. And I think that's kind of historically what we've done is keep the budget to a minimum, keep it really tight because we don't want to burden people.
Don't want to cost burden.
But at the same time,
I
there's just not excess and we can't bank on
here
that.
in 2 years, and our estimated fund balance at the end of the year has been drawn down.
Or
so
we're having to
we
make
don't-
huge
yeah,
rate increases to
right.
make up for it. So
So even the 12% difference, going to $17 base rate with 84.90 accounts, it's only $1,020
for the year for a
for
month,
the difference added to.
for the year for a month,
That's for a month.
so $12,000 for a year. So, but
That's not much, but I
it's
mean,
not much, but it's, that makes that number 262, which makes this number, so, and really that's, based on your guidance, and if you want us to go back and run some different assumptions, we can certainly do that and come back to you with that. It's just whatever your direction is, we have the ability.
I'm 1 out of 5, but I see a huge concern drawing down that fund balance.
Is there somewhere within this documentation what we think the increase in total revenues might be with these new rates?
Yes.
Did I miss
So
it?
on if you back up to the page, they have the kind of categorical look. Page. Right before, right at the end of expenses.
Okay.
Page 8. It doesn't actually show the dollars, but we can give them to you real quick. It's not huge. And what's
For water revenue?
1403, yeah. Well, just do total revenues. Or water, either one. Let's see.
So
I should have given
the
you a dollar
proposed
increase.
Service revenues reflect the proposed water rates as shown on the.
Water and sewer together.
That's right. It does assume the rate increases which have been proposed before you today.
Just slightly less than $1 million.
That's right.
700,000.
714,000. But you have to, when you go and look at, where these numbers are, some of that gets eaten up in the additional supplies,
But
so.
if the
correct.
rates do increase the revenues by that amount, would it help with the transfers in the next year?
Could if the revenues exceed expenses, because then we would have some money left over at the end of the year. But that's just banking on that, and the water fund compared to the general fund is small. Last year, our total surplus from 21 was about $400,000, and that was because the expenses just didn't hit where we thought they were. It wasn't because revenue exceeded. And that's what we were trying to be super careful when we went through this revenue modeling thing, is not to get back in the situation to where we hope we make water revenues. Because, in order to have excess, technically, if these are the expenses that we need to operate, unless something happens and we just don't need all those expenses, revenue would have to come in better than expenses for us to have any money left over at the end of the year. If we budgeted correctly, I don't anticipate having a huge surplus. That's but I know that's a guess in the water fund. Right, and that's not a good way to, that's not really a good way to budget and model. You budget on need, and
What, I mean, what did we do not to draw that down? What are, I
we
mean,
were gonna have to increase the transfer. I mean, that's the only way. And so realistically, my estimation, and again, this is based on today, this is not based on what we do in the fall and moving forward, that we really need to be putting 400 to 450,000 in that fund every year.
so really, it's not as much about rates as it is about, general fund transfers into.
Well, we can't transfer from the general fund.
Right.
So it's all gotta come from the revenues, so it is about revenues, because
So it
this
is.
is its own standalone, we can't take money from the general
So
fund
it's
because that's
the only
property
way
tax, correct?
So it's the only option.
It's-
Right,
No
it has
other
to come from
option.
That's right, and it's really about the rate structure, right? So it's the stability of the rate. Right now, you still have a rate structure that very much has a very low base rate, right? And we'd be happy to get you some comparisons to other
You can see the
cities.
graph, I
Well,
mean.
but that's your overall
Yeah.
Okay.
water service, not necessarily the base rate. The reality is
True.
what the rate study from several years ago said is that not only are our rates low, but our base
Base
rate
rate's
is very
very
low. And so every year we're banking on selling a bunch of water and that volumetric charge versus a base rate charge. And so that's really where we need to see significant changes over time to be more sustainable.
Well, I mean, maybe it's just a small consideration for this year, but it helps us stay ahead as if we continue to move up and we're not making such big jumps.
What we'd like to do is, and we'll talk more about it in this presentation, but we'd like to come back to you guys with that multi-year recommendation. You know, we've got a pretty good plan in place on this proposal, and certainly want y'all to give us feedback for this year's rates. But I think we're going to have a significant discussion next Tuesday in the workshop about your capital projects and where you want to kind of start heading in that direction, because that's not really built into this rate structure at all. And then asset replacement, right? Those are the two other pressure points. From an operational standpoint, we're moving towards better sustainability with this rate proposal. But on asset replacement and capital projects, we're
not there.
not.
And again, the base rate that Trina just gave you, that's looking at residential only, so you have to take into consideration, there's commercial accounts and irrigation accounts. So that 12,000, whatever number we just gave you, could essentially
Across
be
that.
closer to 25 by the time you
Yeah.
you bring in all of those
We bring in the
factors.
other accounts.
We just really focus on residential because that's
the
the bulk of our
customer.
accounts and that's the customer that we serve every day in that regard. So, you know, we'll take whatever direction you'd like us to take on that. Just know that
Are you guys, you're willing to have them bring those back? That would be good. Consensus on from everybody?
Yeah, need to see
Okay,
it.
okay.
okay, we'll give you a couple of different recommendations.
Yes,
and,
please.
just some different data and what that would do to the bottom
How it
line,
would
and then we could do that because you know, again, 250,000 is what we could do with the revenues we propose. You know, and again, you know, you're always sensitive to doing rate increases, right? But
Yeah,
revenue, because the way this fund operates, we can't take money from other funds.
I don't wanna be insensitive, that's why I was asking the
Certainly.
question, but it appears that 17 cents more than what's being proposed now is fairly insignificant as far as
Right.
the average customer. I mean, seeing a lot more than that at the pumps when people go to fill up their
Right.
cars.
Well, we can do that and then bring you back that bill comparison so you could see what the change is on the bill comparison if we were to do that.
Yeah.
And then you can kind of give us some direction on how you want that, because essentially what that would do is change the transfer. That would be my recommendation, is to change the transfer. Because asset replacement, and again, we try to put things in here that aren't every year expenses. So that way you're not seeing this big wave in variance in our operational budget.
Thank you.
Sure.
So flipping on to the next slide, we'll talk just briefly about water capital projects, and I don't want to belabor this because again we're going to have a significant conversation next Tuesday. But you do have kind of the big sheets that we reference quite a bit, and I do want to just talk about several key projects that were completed in the recent past. One, again, we referenced the TTHM mitigation project, which is the filtration carbon GAC. Carbon filtration system that was installed at the water treatment plant. It was a major project that we did in partnership with Texas Water Development Board. The Loop 534 Ellenberger well, certainly you've seen a lot of press on that over this last year, but a major new supply source for us. Again, we're going through and in the process of wrapping up the water wastewater master plan update. And then Legion Lift Station wasn't all that long ago, but remember that was one of the major last lift stations that we were needing to update that will really allow for the use and accommodation and growth in that southern corridor of our community. So again, just wanted to highlight a few of those recently completed projects. For FY23, we've got a number of projects that are slated within your capital project itinerary. Julie mentioned the Phase 3 advanced metering infrastructure. That is the last phase, and so that pushes us from that 80% we're at right now to the full 100% of all of our customers having those advanced meters and being able to take advantage of that. So we're excited at that. That's been a great work over the last couple years. NAP wastewater collection project, and again, that is a transfer of some remainder funding that we had of water development funds that we were able to forward over. Actually, that was a savings that we had from the Legion Lift Station project. And then lowest tank replacement, Water Street, Water Main, and Westminster Utilities. Those are all in the process of finalizing engineering and putting those out to bid, and then we'll know more about what those costs are. Right now, these are all estimates, basically from NAP on down. Those are all just estimated engineering costs, and so we'll be able to really hone in on that. Hopefully, really, probably the next 3 or 4 months, we anticipate having those all out to bid, and so you're going to start to see some of those projects coming up on your council agendas for approval of funds and contracts. So again, I know I kind of hit you with a fire hose on that, but if you have any questions, like I said, we're going to have quite a bit of conversation next Tuesday during your workshop. So. And then general capital projects, we did mention to you, I know we're talking about water fund today, but we did have the other big sheet since we're talking capital project funding. And again, not intending to go through every one of these. We did a pretty major update for you guys at your last workshop just on status of current projects. But I did want to mention a couple of them that were key priorities for this group coming out of your council retreat. Namely items 7, 8, and 9, facilities master plan and condition assessment, the pavement condition reassessment, and then a comprehensive plan update, which may include several area development plans. I know you all had emphasized the desire for additional planning and a potential overlay in regards to Nimitz Lake and a potential Guadalupe River overlay. You'd also talked about really wanting to hone in on the catalyst area around our medical district and Peterson Hospital, and then also the Legion area. And so what we would intend is for those three to really have specific areas of focus that we would include with an overall master plan update. We are coming up on 5 years now after Kerrville 2050 had been passed initially, and so we are due for, as a best practice, an update on that, and so we would anticipate all that kind of rolling up on there. So, again, not wanting to go through all these with you today, but just wanted to get them in front of you in case you did have any follow-up questions from last week, and happy to answer any questions you may have today or offline going forward. Lots of good work that this community has invested in itself over a long period of time, and I think we see dividends in a lot of different ways, both in quality of life, as well as just continuing to be able to go out there and do good business.
Well, and there's been some good looking to the future that causes a lot of consternation when it happens, but these things pay off.
Absolutely. It's community investing in itself for sure. So we'll flip to the next slide and talk a little bit about water fund debt service. Trina, I think you're going to hit that one.
Yes, just a quick overview. So, debt service this year for fiscal year 23 is $4,173,981. So that puts us at a capacity of 29%. Per our financial management policy, we should be at 35% of our revenues for debt service. So we have a little bit of room there. We are working with our financial advisors at First Southwest to look at what kind of capacity we have possibly on the debt side. If anything comes up, shall we need. We just put this chart out here to give you the purposes of what each of these debt series are. There's been a lot of refinancing here, but our latest ones are the 2018 series for the Legion Lift Station and TTHM projects. Pretty much that's where we're at. We're waiting for just the feedback from the financial advisors to see what we can do in the near future.
So no different than any business that's out there. This is a business investing in itself, right? This is a business one that can't fail, right? We have to provide water to our customers, and these are long-term assets, and we'll talk a lot about it next Tuesday. But it's a water supply that's been around for over 100 years, and it's going to be a water supply and a water company that's going to be hopefully around another 100 years. But it's one that has to continue to invest itself, right? And so we've got to talk about how that works and what sustainability is over the long term and what the needs are, particularly over the horizon that's been identified within Kerrville 2050. More to come.
Okay, well, just a quick look at a couple of these smaller funds, and then we can circle back to anything you guys have questions on. Hotel Occupancy Fund, kind of a big one, actually did 2 slides this year because there's a few things coming out of here. So we're proposing 1.9 million in revenue for fiscal year 23. That's 6% higher than fiscal year 22, and we continue to grow that fund, whether it's through hoteliers. We know there's been price changes and things like that, but people are traveling here in that scene. So strong fund. So proposed expenses, the 2.7 million there, and then kind of outlined the highlights. So CBB obviously gets the largest amount of funding from the HOT fund, and so that is an automatic allowable expense by the comptroller that we're allowed to fund a CBB.
them at 100%?
We do.
Okay.
We do. Their budget is projecting an 8.5% increase over fiscal year 22. We've looked at it in detail, and I know that Julie's going to give us a better look at that on Thursday. But I think that you'll be impressed with some of the things that they're proposing to do with that small increase, given
Julie,
everything we're dealing
excuse
with.
me.
Yes.
I'm going to
Okay.
K-Board to tell them what good shape we're in,
Okay.
and so I need to
Okay.
be excused.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you.
Pass me the cup. Bye, Judy.
See you guys later.
Bye. So some events that we have in support throughout that. One of the biggest ones this year being Solar Eclipse. So we have some money in there this year, and then also some money in there for next year. And we do have a Solar Eclipse planning board that's working through logistics to try to make sure that we're in good shape all the way around for those events when they come.
You said that's the only new one, is that what you said?
Yes, that's the only new one. We have historically done 100,000 kind of a reimbursement situation with Callow and Playhouse 2000 for operations. So they submit to us receipts and invoices at the end of the year, and we will reimburse them up to that amount. They have to turn that into us. Arts Co-op funding, that's the same as it's been. The transfer into the general fund looks a little bit different because remember golf is in the general fund now, and we've always had to transfer to golf to support some of their tournaments and things like that, which is allowable. When we look at specifically Heart of the Hills tournament, we have probably, without going back and looking, 50% or more of those people are from far out of town, and many of them from other states. I was very interested when I first saw the zip code list for that tournament, that we have people from all over the nation that fly in for that tournament. So I feel like that's a good way to spend some promotional dollars.
Coming up next week, actually.
That's right. That's right.
Which one is it?
Heart of the
Heart of the
Hills.
Hills,
Mhm. Yeah, and then of course, the golf course has been, which we haven't spent any funding specifically for this, but they've been now hosting some regional golf tournaments from around the state, and those are bringing schools in that are spending the night and those kind of things. So some good stuff happening over there.
Can you remind me, it's one of those questions I just know
It's
I
okay.
ask every year. The Arts Co-op marketing. It's
What
a
is that?
small number, but who manages that, and how does the city get information on how that money is used?
So CBB manages that for the city. So that is a transfer to the CBB separate from their operational dollars. They do have a board of about 13 agencies that help them drive the marketing specific for those arts co-op programming and those different art entities that are in there. We have had conversation with Julie Davis about we're probably due for a contract revision on that, just to make sure that we are comprehensive in the agencies
Right.
that are being represented on there.
Good.
It's been several years old. I think maybe 10 years old.
Does
in
that
fact.
contract have provisions for when it needs to be renegotiated? Because that's something that's gonna change very often over time with new agencies or arts coming in and maybe some going away, and, you know, just making sure everybody has an opportunity to participate in that.
That's right, and that's it's been fortunate that that arts board really provides a lot of input because they're tapped into that world, right? And so they're very aware of what those changes that are happening there, and so they're.
But I mean, is that board made up of? The board's got to be made up of special interests, I would think. I mean, specific to, organizational interests or things like that.
Yeah, it's really meant to represent a pretty wide cross section of different art mediums, right?
Sure.
So both live arts, Museum of Western Art, all different types of facets. But again, we were actually just having a conversation last week with CVB about it's time for a contract
Good,
revision.
because it's small dollars, but for arts, small dollars is big.
Mhm.
And just not to leave anybody out of the opportunity.
Absolutely.
The two big one-time expenses here, or one big one-time expense, actually, you'll remember that the HOP fund has $1 million committed to HHHC. I'll talk just a minute about how that's gonna affect our fund balance overall. That's a one-time expense, and then the CBDB did request some help with some capital improvements that they need to do to their facilities. And so they haven't really gone out for bid for that yet. We were kind of in the discussion phases, but flooring, I think some kind of bringing things up to date and more modern in there, some lighting situations and a few other projects that Julie spoke to specifically. So we put this in here as a proposal to be a one-time capital assistance, I guess, if you will, and it would be designed on a reimbursement basis. So it wouldn't be a check that was cut to them. We would help them work through that process.
And the reason we did that again is really to kind of separate out their normal operational budget, and so you wouldn't see these kind of wide
Do we
swings
own
in there.
that facility?
They lease it. They have a long-term lease on that facility, and they do operate as a separate nonprofit entity.
They lease it from a private individual?
Is our understanding.
It's a really long-term lease. We were looking at the terms when she was here.
So again, just
So the leasehold, basically.
Yeah.
so again, just speaking towards the overall hotel occupancy fund, these are specific dollars that are collected from short-term stays within the community, whether they be at hotels or other short-term residential providers. Again, these are statutorily directed towards putting heads in beds, right? So essentially, these are all marketing or event type efforts to bring people to this community so that they're then utilizing those hotel avenues. So these don't go towards general fund operations in any way.
The next page is just kind of showing you the fund balance now and estimated moving forward, so that you can see that we are drawing down the fund balance. In 23, about 825,000 we're getting into the fund balance there. But all things considered, and if everything lines up correctly, I'm estimating we're still going to be at about $1 million at the end of 23. So pretty healthy fund balance. And then this is the kind of revenue chart that I give you year over year, month over month at council, just so you can kind of see what the growth is. And I will say, yes, you look at April and May of 20, and we know what was happening then. But I mean, we still came out of that year better than budget. And so from a tourism standpoint, I think that people come here, and regardless of what it was. So we came out of that super healthy and barely bounced back to 21 that ended way better than budget. So that's helped our fund balance quite a bit too. So we're able to do that $1 million to HHAC and not hurt the fund.
A couple of just interesting things as we look at this slide. I think if you look at the comparison of that blue to the purple, particularly across April, May, June, July, I mean, you'll see it's a significant increase in the hotel industry from what we've seen as a comparison to FY19, right? And that's because of the investments that this community has made in tourism type activity, things like the sports complex, right? Things like the tennis center, things like Shriner Golf Course. And so all of those things add to what's always been a great place because of the natural assets and the river and the hills and the other aspects to it. But this community has made great investments in tourism, and they pay dividends, and the data proves that out. Again, speaking to that healthy fund balance, basically even with the capital improvements and those expenditure reduction we're seeing in there, Our year-end fund balance basically is 50% of our annual expenses across that entirety of that fund. And basically, it could fund a whole year of CVB operations if needed.
And those kind of things also bring sales tax in.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Absolutely.
think that's a big reason that, pushing tourism makes a lot of sense, because we're helping out property taxpayers by, getting people to shop here and eat here.
Yes, Library Memorial. So, we just wanted to highlight some of the 22 projects that were made and done. We replaced the HVAC unit at the library, upgraded lighting, the ramp to Tranquility Island is complete, and our mobile library van came in and is suited and booted, and we had some technology updates in the large meeting room, so meetings are already taking
The
place.
mobile library van is here, is that what she said?
It's being wrapped right
Finally.
now.
Alright, I wanna ride.
So for 23, not a lot of changes on expenditures with the exception of the contribution to the Heart of the Hill Heritage Center. Library Memorial is contributing $2 million for that. We have book purchases for $60,000. The Mango Languages Learning System, the ebooks, and all the streaming subscriptions come out of Library Memorial, $32,000 for the year. And then some of her Daniel's programs for the youth and adults come out here.
And streaming subscriptions is new, is that right?
No, not
Was
really.
there
It's
some
just we've
updates?
added some
Added,
things. We've
okay.
added the streaming video.
Okay. Streaming video, okay.
Much like Netflix, but you get it with your library card.
It's free.
Hey, I use my online subscription daily. So it's a very nice asset to have.
So what funds the Library Memorial is Friends of the Library and private donators all throughout the year. So we get unexpected contributions.
Yes,
quite
we do.
often.
I know, and I set up my own, but
Yeah, we try
I
to
don't
do
know,
it to
might
other
get any
funds.
unexpected donations.
I'm like, look, you got new shoes.
So moving on to police and fire special revenue, in 22 we were successful at raising funds for a K-9 unit, and that Tahoe unit has been ordered.
It's here.
Is
It's
it
being
here?
outfitted.
Okay.
Awesome. It's being
Fine.
outfitted.
So for 23 proposed expenditures, it's very minimal. We have some Leouse revenue, $5,000 for training officers and weapons, and cease funds help speed these programs also. We're going to start ramping those back up. Municipal court special revenue, we wanted to highlight that we have used money from the registrations. The new program they implemented, we get $7?
It's an extra $1 on your vehicle registration. I believe we get 60 cents of it, and it has to go into this fund.
Okay.
So those can be used for school crossings and special things of those natures. So we did complete revamping 2 school zones, and some of this pays for the city marshal salary through that fund also. So same thing in 23, we're going to propose updating our traffic control devices and some upfitting some of those other street improvements for child safety and crosswalks in school areas.
In Louise Hayes Park, those little ramps with the flashing lights.
So we're just trying to leverage all the dollars that we see come in through the door for operations and keeping the safety of the community at bay.
And it's 67 cents per vehicle
I'll have
registration.
to tell you the exact number. Every person pays an extra $1. The city gets a portion of that dollar. I'm not exactly sure how much it is right off the top of my head, but I believe it's like 60 cents.
Okay.
But I'll have to look and see. We're estimating about $26,000 in fiscal year 23. That's from the tax assessor number based on the number of vehicles that are registered within the county. So it's assuming that everyone registers and they transfer that to us quarterly.
In those registrations, does that count if they do it online? Because okay, really?
So
Okay.
you now, no matter who, if and it's a new state law.
Okay.
And
It's
all
not
that
just
money
if they
has
go down to the courthouse and
Nope.
do it.
Everybody.
It's a state law.
Okay.
If you have a vehicle that's being registered,
Okay.
you pay that extra $1 and then it's distributed to the community you live in specifically for child safety. And there's very specific projects that we can use it for. But that offsets a little bit of the burden from some of the things the streets department may wanna do, that we can utilize that funding somewhere else. So lastly, and not a whole lot of specifics, but I wanted to go over a grant fund with you. So this is a special fund that really just is a kind of a holding place, I guess, for grant money that comes in, depending on the size of the grant and the size of the project, whether it be it's fully grant funded or we have a matching component or those kind of things. Oftentimes, we'll transfer these funds out to CIP so that if they're going to be a multi-year project or something like that. So most things aren't paid for directly out of the grant fund. It's just kind of a pass-through place for revenue to land. So it'll include larger grants, like that's where our ARPA dollars come into play and are held into the city until we move them out for specific projects. The police body camera system we just talked about, that is a reimbursement type grant. However, the money will initially come into there and then be transferred out to CIP. So some of the 23 things that we're looking at, of course, are the police body cameras and in-car systems. So you can see that project $680,000, but 238 of that is grant funds, and then the remainder is ARPA. So we won't be touching operations or CIP dollars for that. Household hazardous waste event that David puts on annually, usually about $40,000. Every other year, he gets a grant from ACOG that's $25,000. So that offsets a large portion of that expense, and then the remainder comes out of the landfill fund, which you pay 40 cents on your water bill for environmental fee that goes to the landfill and the post-closure fund, which is a whole nother conversation about how that works. We've talked a lot about the Cdbg Grant and the walkway improvements that we'll be doing over here downtown and kind of in the Cuts area, I guess the best way to describe it. So total project grant funding, $350,000, and our matching fund, $79,000. We've talked through that a little bit. The tech stock.
CDBG stand for again?
Community Development Block Grant.
Okay,
This one is downtown and Main
Correct.
Street specific.
That's the one
That's correct.
Yeah.
approved that.
We just did.
Just recently.
That's correct.
Kerrville's not an entitlement city on the overall CDBG funds,
Gotcha.
but this one was a competitive grant, right? Correct.
Okay,
Specific to Main Street.
okay.
And then the tech stock grant, grant funding right at $1 million, with the matching fund being $263,000. Of course, that's still kind of in process, but we've been awarded. It's just we're working through the process of that.
It's being
That
engineered.
project,
It's being
yes.
engineered right now.
Yes.
It's moving from 30% to 100% engineering.
For which one again?
So this is for the Transportation Alternative Program. This is the sidewalks kind of around Peterson Hospital and the post office and
The one they asked us to come back and give a little bit of amendments to, right? And we resubmitted something to them.
Yeah, well, the initial one was a little different than the final one.
Right, that one, okay.
And then recently, and I don't think we've talked about this one yet, but the hazard mitigation grant. So we applied for, well, actually we worked with a third party to apply for some grants, basically for generators throughout the city. And we were awarded, so $4.6 million in awards. So the matching component of that's $468,000. And then we manage, other grants on a case-by-case basis. And one of the things in finance, as far as adding that compliance person, was the follow-up for all of these grants, and then also making sure we're in compliance with federal purchasing and all of those kind of things that has to be done. But kind of the message here is we're doing everything we can to source funding outside of rates in the water fund and property tax in the general fund and other things like that. So I would say we're doing more grant work than we have done, I don't know historically, but historically for me. And it is a lot of work, and there's a lot of people involved, and whether we use a third party or we're doing them in-house or whatever. But at the end of the day, I mean, you can see there what the impact is financially, and if we had done those projects in-house, or maybe those projects weren't funded because we had other priorities. But this just gives us an opportunity to utilize some funding that we're not asking for from citizens every day, but still enhance the quality of the city.
And it does take staff time, a significant amount of staff time, both in finding them, getting the applications ready, and then obviously the administration of the grants, and then the post reporting a lot of times is very significant. So it does take staff time, and we're very cognizant of that. And there are matching funds that are usually required. But again, it's a great example. We've been able to leverage over $6-7 million worth of outside grant funding with a little under $1 million of local funds, and so We do think it's significant, and we do want you all to know that we're out there looking for those, every opportunity we can to help reduce that burden on our citizens.
So when we look at the grants here and these proposed expenditures, all of them have been granted except we're still waiting on the downtown one, right?
That's
No, it's
been
granted.
awarded
That
as
is
well.
granted. So we're all
It's awarded.
covered here when it comes to these proposed expenditures. We know that the grants that we're looking at, in order for us to have either a matching fund or for us to cover the rest somehow or another, we're covered.
And we have built these matching fund pieces into your
Right.
community improvement program.
Right.
So that is part of that tie off there.
Okay.
So we'll be able to talk about which ones are fully funded, which ones, and some of these, like for example, this generator one, we don't expect that to happen in '23. That's probably gonna be a multi-year project, especially given supply the way that it is, and it's working a lot through FEMA, so there's some federal roadblocks we'll have to go through as far as paperwork and things like that, but we're suspecting that's gonna be a 24-25 project.
Okay.
So we kinda have it as TBD right now, but we do know what the total is, we know what the funding is, and we know what the match is, so we have a little bit of time to work through the details of that, but these other ones are, already, taken care of, and you'll remember that the CDBG and also the, Catalyst Area 2 was part of that mid-year, transfer, so those funds, those matching funds are already set aside in CIP. And we'll talk a lot more about that, as we start digging into CIP over the next few weeks. So any questions, comments, direction, things you'd like us to go do, bring back to you?
I just think what the point that you brought up about, the rate needs to be looked at with a couple of.
We'll bring you a couple of
Different
different
options.
scenarios and say, here's what this would do, here's what that would do,
Yes.
with the idea that, you know, that would go to the transfer, asset replacement or CIP, one of the two, because. But we'll give you a couple of options and you can give us some feedback on what you wanna do. We'll get those to you as soon as we can.
So again, this was really your last major budget workshop. We'll take the input that we've received and continue to work towards your proposed budget at the end of this month. Obviously, again, big driver on that is going to be property tax rolls and where those come in next week, hopefully. And then once we get those, we'll be able to really finalize the proposed budget that we'll be talking extensively with you all about in the August and September timeframe.
And if anything's needed between then, we can get together. If you need feedback from us or something one-on-one, just reach out. We can get it for you. These are to keep. Yes, ma'am.
Staff, any other inputs or thoughts? Anybody?
They're all ready for lunch.
Alright, adjourned.
Thank you guys.
Thank y'all for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Man.